How to knit fingerless gloves for beginners. Hi everyone, my name is Norman. I run the blog nimbleneedles.com, and today I want to show you everything you need to know about knitting fingerless gloves the easy way. There are many different ways to knit fingerless gloves, but in this video my focus will be on a very simple yet effective design that is knit flat and seamed together later on, and has a very easy technique for the thumb pull you do not need to be scared of at all. While the pattern is really simple, I also made sure to not oversimplify the process. So my second focus is showing you how to knit fingerless gloves that really fit and not only throw some shorthand instructions in your face, because, well, even if you are a beginner, one size does not fit all. So let's dive right into it. First of all, some housekeeping. I know you are all eager to start knitting, and that's good. But the preparations for a knitting project are almost as important as the actual knitting. And speaking from experience, this is the part where most beginners fail. They rush into a project and forget about the preparations, and then they end up with one size too big or too small, or a couple sizes. So please don't skip ahead. I said these fingerless gloves are perfect for beginners, but you will need to know some basic techniques. You need to know how to knit the knit stitch and the purl stitch, and you also need to know how to cast on and bind off stitches. If you don't know these techniques yet, I kindly ask you to watch my videos about them first and maybe start with a more simple practice pattern first. I'll link you a playlist with all the techniques up in here and in the description below. You will also need a seaming technique called an invisible seaming technique called the mattress stitch. You will be able to follow along as I do it step by step here in this video, so really don't be afraid. And then of course we quickly need to talk about the materials you need for these basic fingerless gloves. I'll put links to all the items you need for this pattern in the description below. You need around 100 meters of some light worsted yarn. I'm using this beautiful alpaca yarn in mint green by Pasquale. You don't need to buy this specific yarn, rather get something within your budget and in the color and quality of your choice. A wool blend with some acrylic will be a very good start. Just make sure it's light worsted. And be careful, if your hands are a bit bigger, then you will probably need a bit more yarn. One 100 gram or two 50 gram skeins should be plenty though. Then you will need circular knitting needles, US size 6. That's 4 millimeters. I'm using the Knitter's Pride Nova Platina here. Don't be afraid, we are knitting with circular needles, but the project is knit flat. Circular needles just make it easier to check your work in progress and check if it fits. And then you need scissors and a tapestry needle and a measuring tape. And this is entirely optional, some pins. And if you want to print out this pattern and find the directions for all the other different sizes, then kindly visit my blog. You'll find the link in the description below as well. And then we're ready to go. The first thing we need to do is we need to knit a little swatch. So kindly cast on 24 stitches with a long tail cast on. 24 stitches, and then we need to knit 12 rows in the 2x2 rib. So that's knit 2, purl 2 across all stitches and all rows. Knitting the swatch will give you the opportunity to practice the 2x2 rib stitch and find out your exact size. If you don't want that, cast on 47 stitches and skip ahead, even though I really don't recommend it. Because, you know, you might not be aware of it yet, but all knitters, they knit differently. You might knit with a slightly different tension, and your technique will be slightly different as well. Maybe you bend your finger a millimeter or two more, and all this will result in a different fabric. So even if you are using the exact same needles and the exact same yarn as I do, chances are really high your finished fingerless gloves would have a slightly different size. So if I only told you to cast on 47 stitches now, this could lead to some big disappointments, and you don't want that. So I cast on 24 stitches, and now I knit across in the 2x2 rib. So knit 2, purl 2 across all stitches, and we need around 12 rows. So just knit across. So I finished knitting my little swatch in the 2x2 rib here, and I bound off all the stitches, but I didn't cut the yarn. It's still attached to the ball, so we can use it later on again. And now we need to take measurements. So stretch out that little swatch a tiny bit so you can see the individual ribs, but don't overstretch it like this, just a little bit. And then measure out 5 centimeters or 2 inches. 2 inches. And then count how many stitches you need for those 5 centimeters or 2 inches. In my case, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stitches. Maybe you need 10, maybe you need 11. It doesn't matter, just note that number. And then you need to take one more measurement, and that is the circumference of your hand at its widest point. Typically that's here around the knuckles of your thumb. So measure that here, and in my case that's 23 centimeters. Just note down the number, because from here adjusting those gloves to your size is easy math. So I think it's best you grab a calculator or use your mobile phone or a computer, whatever you like, and calculate how many stitches you need to cast on. I needed 11 stitches to cover 5 centimeters of 2x2 rib, and my hand at its widest point is 23 centimeters. So the first thing I do is I divide 11 stitches by 5 centimeters, and that's 2.2. That's a factor. That's how many stitches you need for 1 centimeter, or I need for 1 centimeter. And we have 23 centimeters. So multiply 23 times 2.2. That's, in my case, that's 50, rounded at least, 50.6. Now, here's the thing. Ribbing is, well, it's stretchy, really stretchy, but we want a nice grip, but we don't want to overstretch. So we need to factor in that negative ease of the 2x2 rib. So what you have to do is you have to multiply, or rather multiply this number here times and subtract 10%. So take 50.6 or whatever your number is and multiply it times 0.9. In my case, that would be 55.6, and round it, I mean. And then you need to round down to the next number divisible by 4. In my case, that's 44 stitches. And whatever your measurements are, you need to do these 4 steps or calculations. Just throw them into your calculator, and this will give you the exact number you need to cast on. I know this process is a bit more complicated, and I also know a lot of beginners want easy answers, like cast on 40 stitches. And when I was, planning this video, I was considering to give you just that. But then I realized, and I was, thinking back, and in my 30 years of knitting, I have seen my share of beginner projects that ended up way too big or way too small. And it all comes down to trusting those easy numbers. And I feel it's totally unnecessary, because all you need to do is sit down for 50 minutes, knit a tiny little swatch, and put 2 numbers into a calculator, and there is your cast on number. And I promise you, these 15 minutes are well invested and will prevent so much frustration in the long term. Most beginners don't want to hear it, but I can't stress enough how important those swatches are for anything that should fit your body. On a side note, normally you knit much bigger swatches and you wash them and then you block them, and only then will you measure them. But this is a beginner pattern, and I feel a shortcut is okay. So start by casting on however many stitches your calculation said, and add 3 selvage stitches. I'm using the long tail cast on, and I'm using 2 needles because I want a really stretchy edge. So cast on, my swatch said 44 stitches, so I cast on 47 stitches with 2 needles and a long tail cast on, and we will need those 3 extra stitches to create a nice and invisible seam in the end. Also, one more thing. Ideally, you should leave a really long tail because of 20 inches, or an extra of 20 inches, because we need this longer tail for sewing in later on. If you don't have it, it's no big deal, then you will have to weave in 1 more tail, but ideally there should be a tail of 20 inches. So cast on all those stitches. So I cast on all stitches, and I really have a long tail. If you worry about the tail, just pull out a yard or so, a bit more than a yard, and then you will be fine. We will be knitting these fingerless gloves with 2 different basic knitting stitches, so a 2x2 rib and a little section of stockinette stitch in between around the wrists. And then we will continue with the 2x2 rib. And the repeat for the first section is knit 1, and then knit 2, purl 2, and at the end knit 2. And for the wrong side, it's purl 2, and then knit 2, purl 2, and at the end 1 more purl stitch. So let's knit a couple of stitches together. So it's knit 1, then knit 1, knit another stitch, then purl 2, knit 2, and so on. It's really that simple. What helps me in those first rows is counting out loud, because you can't read your pattern yet, so you can easily mess up the 2x2 rib stitch. So I always go and I say it out loud. 1, 2, then 3 means purl, 4, or you could go knit, knit, purl, purl. And by saying it out loud, I feel it really helps me not getting distracted, because I can hold that repeat for 10 or 20 stitches, but then my mind, I'll start thinking of other stuff, because this is really boring in a way, and it's always the same. So if I say it out loud, I can't think of other things. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is what helps me getting the repeat right. So I knit about 14 rows in the 2x2 rib stitch here, and now is the perfect time to check if your fingerless gloves actually fit around your hand. And this is precisely the reason why we are knitting with circular needles. So simply slide your work in progress to the middle of your cable, and then try to fit it around your hand like this, and it should fit around the widest part of your hand quite effortlessly. So the ribs shouldn't be stretched out like this, and they shouldn't be too condensed either. You should see the ribs quite clearly without overstretching them. And if it's too wide or too narrow, that means you would have to unravel your project here and cast on 4 or 8 stitches more or less. Just make sure it's multiples of 4. But if you knit your swatch diligently, then this really shouldn't be a problem. And once you're satisfied with your fit, you can continue knitting in the 2x2 rib stitch. We need a total of 10 centimeters or 4 inches in the 2x2 rib. For me, that's 30 rows. Instead of counting, you can also measure out your work in progress with your tape. And while we are at it, here's one really nice little trick. But before, I wanted to remind you, I love shooting these videos, but it takes hours upon hours to create them, so I really need your support. So why don't you give me a little thumbs up or leave a nice comment right now, or even subscribe to my channel. Now here's the little trick. Instead of counting stitches and checking your repeat all the time, if you're on the right side or the wrong side and so on, you can simply look at your knitting and read it. So, do you see this little V here? And here's a V, and here's a little V. And this means this is a knit stitch. And you have to knit all knit stitches. So you knit this stitch, and here we have a V again, and so you knit it. And here there is a little bump around the base of the stitch. This means this is a purl stitch, so you purl it. So with that knowledge, you can just simply look at your ribbing and see, okay, I need to purl that stitch, and you don't need all the counting and in your head. Just look at your knitting and knit every stitch the way it appears. So I finished knitting those 10 centimeters in 2x2 rib stitch, and now we are switching to 6 rows of stockinette stitch. Typically your wrist is the narrowest part of your hand, and we want to account for that. The important part is that you stop your ribbing in a row where you purled those last 3 stitches. If you didn't, then simply knit across one more row until you finish with those last 3 purl stitches. And then simply pick your knitting needle and knit across. Stockinette stitch means you knit the right side and you purl the wrong side, and we need 6 rows of stockinette stitch here. So knit across all stitches, and when you're at the end of the row, turn around and purl across. So I finished knitting those 6 rows in stockinette stitch, as you can see, and from here you need to continue once again in the 2x2 rib stitch. It's the same repeat as before. So knit 1, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, and on the wrong side purl 2, then knit 2, purl 1. And you need to knit 4 more centimeters in the 2x2 rib stitch before we can start with the thumb hole. Now let's take a look at my hand here. So we covered this stretch here, then we filled this with stockinette stitch, and now we need to cover this stretch here from the wrist to the knuckle of your thumb. And so I advise you to take your measuring tape and measure it out. See, for me it's roughly 4 centimeters. Now don't fuss over every millimeter, but if it's significantly shorter or longer, then you obviously would have a need to adjust how far you knit the 2x2 rib stitch. I knit 4 centimeters. And also remember, at this point, you can slide your work in progress to the middle of your project at any time and try to wrap it around and see if you can make it fit. Because nothing is worse than finishing a project and only then trying it on and only to realize you knit it too big. I finished knitting those 4 centimeters in the 2x2 rib, and I needed 12 rows to cover that stretch. And now we have the only 2, well, a bit more difficult rows ahead because we need to shape the hole for the thumb. But how do you knit the thumb hole for fingerless gloves? Well, I will show you the most simple version that still results in a good fit. It's not perfect, but for perfect you need to knit in the round using double pointed needles, you need to pick up stitches, you need to know how to increase and so on. And you can certainly learn all that later for your perfect glove, but for now I think we keep things simple. Make sure to comment below if you would like to see a video of me knitting a more elaborate thumb hole. There's one more thing I have to note. You have a left hand and you have a right hand, and you probably want a fingerless glove for your left hand and your right hand as well. So we will have to, now this is flat, and we will have to join this in a round with the seaming technique, and this will leave a little ridge here on the inside. It's totally invisible on the right side, but on the wrong side there's a little ridge, and I personally feel it's best to hide this ridge here where it bothers you the least and not on top of your hand or somewhere. And this means you have to position the hole for your thumb a bit differently depending if you're knitting for the left and your right hand. It's really simple, and we will start with the left side. Start the row by continuing the ribbing, but stop 6 stitches before the middle, right after you finished 2 knit stitches. For me, this means knitting 15 stitches. So 15 stitches. Let me quickly count. 3, 5, 3, 5, 3, and 2 more. So, and as you can see, this is the middle, and I stopped 6 stitches ahead. If you cast on more or less stitches, you have to figure out how many stitches you need to stop before yourself. And now simply bind off 6 stitches, so knit 2 and then pass over 1 stitch, knit another stitch, 2 stitches, knit another stitch, 3 stitches, knit another stitch, 4 stitches, knit another stitch, 5 stitches, and for these last 2 stitches tuck on, keep a really high tension and tuck on those the working yarn really tightly so you're not creating any gaps. So really tightly, and then knit the next stitch with a high tension as well, and then simply continue with the 2x2 rib stitch, just the way you did before. It's just those 6 bind off stitches here in between, and this will form the bottom half of your thumb hole. And then in the return row, continue the ribbing until you come across the bind off. So simply continue your ribbing just the way you always did, and stop right at the position where you ended your bind off. I'm right at the position where I stopped my bind off, and now we need to bridge this gap, and we will be doing it with a backward loop increase. I'll link you my full tutorial up in here with tons of further tips and tricks, but the technique is so simple, I'm 100% sure you can manage it. So what you have to do is you have to wrap the yarn around your thumb like so, like this, And now you simply pick up that loop from below. And there's your first stitch. And then you wrap the yarn around your thumb one more time and pick up that loop from below one more time. So we have 2 stitches and we need 6 stitches all together. So that's 3. And try to do this a bit quite loosely, because if you pull on too tight, then it will be very hard to knit these stitches on the return row. So I have all my 6 stitches, and you know, this, you just learned your very first increase, or probably your very first increase, and from here you simply continue knitting in the 2x2 rib stitch. So here we have a little purl bump, so this means we need to purl these 2 stitches, and then it's the regular rib stitch repeat, so knit 2, purl 2, and so on. So in the return row you simply knit across all stitches and continue the ribbing until you reach the point where you increase those 6 stitches, and here you continue the ribbing. So my last 2 stitches were knit stitches, so I need to purl these stitches. Sometimes it can be quite hard to insert the needle into those stitches, so try to go slowly and maybe loosen them up a bit before you do so. So purl 2, then the next 2 stitches will be knit stitches, and those are usually a bit harder. So 2 knit stitches, go slowly. I do it as well because this can be a bit tricky. So 2 knit stitches, and then 2 more purl stitches. Oops. 2 more purl stitches. And this is the last one. Come on. Go in there, there you go, and 1 last purl stitch. And here you can see I'm stretching, you can see already there is a big gap, so pull on these pull on the working yarn and keep a nice tight tension so you're not creating big eyelets here. This is really important, that you keep a nice tension, or really a high tension, for those gap stitches here. And from here simply continue the 2x2 rib stitch, and we need 4 more centimeters of the rib stitch before we are ready to bind off, so that's 12 more rounds in my case. I finished knitting those last 4 centimeters, and now it's time to bind off. We will bind off with the standard bind off, and the only thing you need to take care of is that you don't knit too tightly, because this ribbing is stretchy and you don't want this to end up too tight. So simply knit 1 stitch, but try to knit loosely. See, I'm stretching out the stitches a bit as I go, and then bind off. But really go in and try to knit a bit looser than you normally would, and then you will end up with an edge that is stretchy enough in this case. And once you bound off all stitches, you can simply cut the tail, leaving 6 to 8 inches for weaving in later. In my case, I used up my yarn quite perfectly, so no cutting, but you should leave a tail of 6 to 8 inches. Congratulations, you finished your first fingerless glove, at least the knitting part, and now we need to do the seaming and join this into a nice little tube. Before we do that, I recommend blocking your finished glove, and I will quickly show you how to do that. Blocking will help to even out the stitches and attain a really nice square shape. What you would have to do is you will have to soak your knitting, your finished project, for 15 to 20 minutes in lukewarm water, and then wring it out gently between a towel. And then you have to pin it to a soft surface. I'm using a special blocking mat here, but a towel on your carpet will work just as fine. And then you have to let it dry. One important note here, this only works for natural fiber, so wool, in this case alpaca, cashmere, and so on. If you are using a pure acrylic yarn or any other kind of chemical yarn base, then this won't work. Then you will have to steam block it using the steaming function of your iron. If it has one, washing won't help. And once it's dry, you can remove the pins. I'm doing this here. Once it's dry, you can remove the pins, and we are ready to start the seaming process. So I removed all pins, and now we are ready to close the seam, and we'll be doing it using the mattress stitch. It's a very simple and effective technique. I'll link you my full tutorial up in here in case you want to see all the possibilities. Now, at the start, I told you to leave a tail of around 20 inches from the cast on, and we'll be using this for the seam now. So make sure your knitting is facing you with the wrong side, so not with this side but with the wrong side, and then simply thread the tail on your tapestry needle like this. And now you have to fold your fingerless glove in the making together. So this is probably a bit harder to see, but this is the edge with just 2 knit stitches, and this is the edge with 3 knit stitches. And here you have a row of knit stitches, and here you have a row of knit stitches, and between those knit stitches there are little ribs, and we need to go underneath them. So I start here at the bottom, and I go through the edge and try to grab that very first rib stitch and pull the yarn through, and then I do the same here on the left side and go through there as well. And then I pick the rib directly above the one I just went underneath and go through it, and so on, left and right. Again, watch my full tutorial in case this is a bit too fast for you. What really helps me is pinning the seam in between my fingers like this, and then I can really easily access those little ribs and find them really fast. So that's how I do it, and it's really a magical process, because when you tug on this tail, the seam will close just like magic, and it's really almost invisible. And one important thing, after a couple of stitches you need to tuck on the tail. Some knitters make the mistake, they seam all the way up to there, and if it's a yarn with a lot of friction, you can't pull on the tail anymore. So always close a couple of stitches and then tuck on the tail, and then continue and not wait until you are done. Now as long as you didn't skip a little rib here, your 2 sides should align perfectly. And there is only one more thing we need to do. We need to weave in the rest of the tail. So I close my seam here, and as you can see, it's really nice and invisible. One thing you will notice is that there is a little gap here, and what you can do is you can graft a knit stitch. So go underneath that rib here, go underneath it, and then from behind go underneath, a bit hard to see, that stitch here, and this will close that little gap here, and then just pierce through that. And now you have these two tails and we need to weave them in. And so it's easiest if you invert your little fingerless glove. And you have a little rib here, or ridge here. This is your seam, and you can easily hide your tail in there. So just go around those ribs a couple of stitches, just like that. Go through them like so. Well, maybe a couple of more stitches. 1, 2, like that. And then pull the yarn through all the way. Oh, all the way. I think I snagged that other all the way. Like this. Sorry for the confusion. And then, I mean, you can basically cut the yarn here, or if you're feeling insecure, you can go into the other direction, right through the seam one more time. And then simply cut the tail. And for the other, there's one more tail, and we will do exactly the same. So thread it on your tapestry needle and simply hide it in that little ridge here. So go through it. This will reinforce it a bit, so be careful. Pull it through. And in my case, this is really this is alpaca yarn, so I can just cut it away right here. And there is your finished fingerless glove, and this was the left side, so let's see if it fits. And I would say it fits like a glove. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed watching this video on how to knit fingerless gloves for beginners the easy way, and you were able to knit along. Please give me a big glove thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. A like or a nice comment, it really helps me producing more of these videos. And of course, make sure to hit that subscribe button in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.